Laura Hamill, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I look forward to talking about your book, The Power of Culture, and learning more from you how we can actually make a difference in the culture of our organizations. But before we do, we'd love to know a little bit more about you, Laura. Whereabouts did you grow up, and how has your upbringing contributed to who you've become?
I love that you add that and that you start with that. That's really cool. I grew up in rural North Carolina. And when I say rural, near Winston-Salem, but actually about an hour from Winston-Salem, near Mount Airy, actually 30 minutes from Mount Airy, near Dobson, North Carolina. So really in the middle of nowhere. And my parents were hippies, real full on hippies. The VW bus, the tie-dye t-shirts. My dad had a long beard and long hair. And in retrospect, it's funny. But at the time, it was really hard because it was North Carolina, which was pretty conservative. Where we lived was definitely like Bible Belt, and we were different. We were different from everybody else. So not only were my parents hippies, but we actually bought 60 acres of land and built a log cabin, and we didn't have electricity. So I grew up without electricity, but still going to like public school.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating. And so a lot of things that I think many of us take for granted around things like hot showers and being able, not having to push your car out of a ditch to go to school every day. Like there are things like that I just feel like, oh, I had such an interesting childhood. So my parents were just very anti-establishment. And so my way of coping, probably no surprise, is to be very establishment. So the way I dealt with it was I'm going to fit in and I'm going to do all the things that society says you should do. So I went to school and I got straight A's, and did a million sports and a million clubs and all kinds of things like that. And there's so much about that was really good. I proved to myself from a very early stage or age that I can figure things out and I can do things. I can do hard things. But there's also a lot about it that is my roots and some of the things that I think were so firmly implanted in me that come out now and that I really, I think, have gone back to in a lot of ways. So a lot of things I rejected, right, when I was little, that I'm like, oh, I get it now. I get some of the reasons why they wanted to do some of those things. So I had a really quite unique childhood. And part of it was also I decided to go into organizational psychology. So I'm an organizational psychologist. And my dad, when I was growing up, never really could keep a job. And it was like a source of, for me, what a lot of the hardship in our life was about was because of that. And it made me just fascinated with work. Like, why did he always hate his manager? And why it was always the man, was always somebody doing something to him. And of course, yeah, I know that there was a lot more to it than just his supervisor. I had this kind of fascination with what is work? And so there's so much about my upbringing that really has affected what I do now.
What a beautiful way of both describing your upbringing, Laura, and it's obvious as an organizational psychologist, you have reflected on aspects of it that have driven you to do what you do, see the world the way you do, which I think is really important before we can interact effectively with others and be part of a healthy culture. We need to get to know ourselves, but also there is an element of this story behind every individual we interact with. It's shocking to me how often people have worked with each other for years where they haven't really taken the time to get to know each other at slightly deeper level than the conversations about the weather or whatever else happens at work. So we could spend hours on that. You have written a book on power of culture. You spent years also at Microsoft
Yes.
before becoming a founder of an organization yourself. What are some lessons you learned from Microsoft with respect to culture?
So many. Working at Microsoft was one of my biggest jobs. I worked there for almost 10 years. And it was really an amazing experience in a lot of ways because as a fairly young in my career or new in my career, I got to do big stuff, right? In a really big company and very, not only like with a lot of employees, but lots of different kinds of topics. And so what I came to understand pretty fast, pretty quickly was the role that the culture was playing in everything that I was working on. For example, I helped start the first employee survey there. And so we were asking questions that were what we would consider climate types of questions, like how's it going with your manager? Do you have clear goals? And topics that are all important. But it was very easy to start seeing the role that the culture was playing in how the experience that employees were having, how that was being manifested, right? The culture was affecting that every day. And so I was seeing that over and over again in every kind of topic I'd study or project I'd do or focus group I'd administer, that the culture was just screaming at me the whole time. And I think Microsoft has a particularly strong culture. I'm not necessarily saying all positive necessarily, just strong. And it was a pretty loud message I was getting. So I learned in that work that, oh my gosh, there's a lot here to understand. And anything that I'm doing in from an organizational psychology perspective, for sure, anything that I'm doing is being impacted by it. And so wouldn't it be good if we understood it? And so we decided to do a pretty big culture assessment there. And it was a fascinating piece of work because we did both quantitative with large scale survey, but also a lot of qualitative work. And that's where I started to really see the power of talking to people when you're trying to understand culture and really doing that in a way that allows you to pull all of it, to be systematic in it and to pull it all together in a way that you can then tell the story back to people in positions of power to help them understand, and especially in a company the size of Microsoft. So I had amazing experiences learning about culture. So, and what was really cool is after I left Microsoft, I was able to work back with Microsoft. Over the next 10 years, I worked on 38 acquisitions. And that was over a long, I think, 7-year time period. Every time Microsoft would acquire a new company, we'd look at the climate and the culture of the company being acquired and compare that to Microsoft. So having a way to be systematic about culture and really dig into it and understand it was something that I feel like I learned a lot there. So that's more from an organizational psychology perspective. I think and from a human and employee perspective, I really realized how much culture impacts human beings because it impacted me. I had, while I was there, I had my kids there. They're now 24 and 20, but I had them while I was there, right? They were born while I was there. And it was really a challenging place to work. It was also a while back. I think things have gotten a lot better in terms of being a working parent and trying to handle the stress, but it was a really stressful place to work and pretty intense. And so I also learned a lot about culture from a personal perspective there and what I needed. And I think what you were saying earlier about the origin story, I think is so important. You have to understand what matters to you. And I think a lot of people haven't done that work to really think hard and take a step back and think about what is the most important and how does that align with the experience I'm having with this culture. Is there some pieces here that are beautifully aligned? Are there some pieces here that are contradictory, right? What matters to me is being challenged every single day. And that's really hard to keep doing.
It is. And you also talk about the experience culture in your book as well, Laura. One of the challenges that I see and I also hear a lot about is the disconnect between the hoped for culture, the stated
Yeah.
ambitions around culture, and that experienced culture.
Yes.
So, what are ways to be able to bridge that gap in organizations?
I think every organization knows now that they're supposed to have values, right? It was like we've made this little bit of progress saying, oh, I'm supposed to care about culture. So let's have values and let's put them on our website. Let's put them behind the receptionist desk. So companies know they're supposed to do that, but most of the time it stops there, right? From my perspective, that's just a very little bitty baby step to actually decide what kind of culture you're trying to create. There's so much more work that needs to happen to actually have that be real and be lived. And it can't be through just cute little swag or like little pictures all over the place. It actually has to be in the day to day, behind closed doors, in Zoom meetings, right? The experience of the culture has to be there. And there's a phrase that I use that's called cultural betrayal. It's the idea of if you actually think you're going to go to a company and you read about its culture and you watch those cool videos that the company created about how cool the culture is, and then you go there and your experience of that is so different, that can, and it sounds dramatic, but betrayal is a word that I think it represents how people feel about it. It hits really deep and you start to withdraw. You start to feel like, wait, this is not what I thought I was getting myself into, right? This is not the place that I thought I was going to be at. And I feel duped. I feel like you've pulled one over on me. So I'm just wholeheartedly agreeing with you that this is a huge problem in many organizations. So there's, I think, multiple steps. This is what I write about in my book is how you actually do this, how you take the steps to actually make your culture come to life. And the first part is very important to make sure that culture you're trying to create is the right one, that you actually have thought about how this is going to help our business succeed.
So you talked about that intentional culture and couldn't agree with you more on that. Who is responsible for it?
A lot of people ask because I think we all really appreciate the idea of we want employees to be involved. We want people who are affected by this to be involved. And I 100% agree that we have to have as many people as we can be involved in the process. However, I don't think it works very well. In most cases, there's some exceptions. It doesn't work very well to say, hey, employees, you go figure it out. You come back to us when you got it figured out. We have to have the people with the most power in the organization be the ones who are the most excited about this work, be the ones who are willing and able to talk about this all day long, because power and culture go hand in hand. And that's one of the reasons why I called my book The Power of Culture. You really have to understand that power shapes culture. We look to the people who have made it in organizations to understand what to do and how we should be acting. So we need the people in the highest position of power to be the ones who are the role models for it, the ones who are the spokespeople for it, or the culture architects of the organization. If we don't have that, what can happen is it just results, right? And new people come into the organization and they look and see, oh, I've never heard a CEO ever say one thing about our culture. I guess it doesn't really matter. I guess it really doesn't, it's not important. And it's just going to go away. So if it's really important, it should be, to me, the CEO who's driving it. So there's the work of driving it and talking about it and making sure everybody understands it's important. That really needs to happen at the top. I love having a process that is kind of a qualitative and quantitative, meaning like focus groups and interviews with people throughout the organization when you're actually first forming the culture, because that's where you hear the most important things around what's happening currently in the culture, what that experience is, because the way that leaders experience culture is different from the way that people in frontline roles experience the culture. So it's so important to involve people to get them excited, but it can't just be, hey, employees, this is yours to own. Come back to me with a new culture that you want, because of power and culture going so hand in hand.
I love the perspective that you share there, Laura, in that there is, first of all, an intentionality that needs to connect to strategy that you also reference in the book that needs to come from the leadership in the organization. There is an
Yes.
ownership that needs to be there. However, that also doesn't mean it's purely top down. There
Right.
is the engagement of everyone in the organization, as
Yeah.
many as possible, in soliciting feedback, getting their thoughts and perspectives. It's a partnership.
Exactly. And that when people feel like they're part of it, when they understand why are we creating this culture and that they're helping to form it and it's going to help like the company be successful, but them also be successful, bringing people along on that journey is really the work. That's what we're talking about. And this is what I think is so interesting. I just yesterday morning, I got a text from a friend who's a CEO and he said something like, "Hey, can you point me to a book on how to have a performance culture?" And I'm like, "Dude, you're missing the point, right?" It's like it's not that you're just gonna find this cookie cutter of, "Oh, here's how we do it, and we just put into place this quarter and we're done." It's the work. It's the rolling up your sleeves, getting really clear, going through being systematic about it, but also being, very open as you go and really doing the work and committing for the long term. And that's one of the reasons why culture just doesn't go as well for many companies because they're just not willing to do that long-term commitment. And they want the easy answer, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I also see lots of CEOs who read books, which is wonderful, and read a book or find a book and then send it to everyone, assuming that's what is going to move the culture. And I worked for an outstanding CEO, but one of the things he did at the time it was very popular was everyone liked who moved my cheese in a way of communicating. We need to change our
Yeah.
culture and everything else, so we bought a copy of Who Moved My Cheese and sent it to everyone in the organization, which might be part of the process. However, there are no shortcuts. You have to put in the work.
No. That's exactly right. You're right. That could be a really great part of the process to just get all on the same page about a couple fundamental ideas, right? But yeah, it's just a little tiny piece. There's so much more to it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book. I was trying to describe to people I was working with in my consulting practice, describe to people this is completely doable. It is, sure, it's a long term commitment. Sure, it can feel hard, but you can take it step by step and you can do this, and it's gonna pay off on lots of fronts if you do the work. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book is just to show it is possible to do it. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go out and hire a big consulting firm to go do the work for you because it's still not gonna feel like yours as much as if you actually do the work. So that's why I wanted to write the book and try to describe that process in simple terms so that it doesn't feel too overwhelming.
So now we understand how the key elements of the culture we come up with. What are ways to actually behavioralize it?
Yeah. And this is I feel like one of the most important pieces to this because a lot of times you'll see values at such a high level, right? Very generic. And it's hard for a person to imagine what does that mean for me? What does that mean for how you want me to behave? And so I really like to have organizations start to do the work of saying, okay, what does this look like for an employee? And the best way to do that is to maybe have a start at it, maybe have a rough draft, but then talk to employees and get them to explain to you when they see this idea of being collaborative, for example, what does that look like in their day-to-day work? Have them describe it. And I usually do focus groups around that to get that more refined. One of the things I also like to do is think about, okay, everybody's an employee, but what are the special extra things that maybe a people manager might need to do to support employees as they're being collaborative? And on top of that, if you're an executive, maybe there are a couple things you need to do on top of being a people manager. So that process of just talking it through, it really creates a lot more understanding. And then you develop this really cool resource that helps people later down the road, maybe after the culture has been rolled out, understand what we're talking about. And you can use that, right, for development conversations to really help people understand what does it mean to live the culture. So behavioralization is a big part of the beginning stages of really getting clear about the culture you're trying to create.
So as you do that, Laura, you also mentioned something which is really relevant to keep in mind, in that culture is not one size fits all and it needs to connect with business strategy. However, if I look at the way culture is described by a lot of CEOs, there are the same half a dozen to at most dozen words that are restated as being the culture that they have or the culture that they want to have. So, how can we reflect on culture and making sure that it is unique and builds on that business strategy rather than the same words that everyone uses.
Everybody uses, yeah. It goes back to that culture cookie cutter ideas. Oh, well, this company has this. We'll just use that. And one of the things that I've found helpful to prevent that a little bit is to actually start with employees and ask them, what is it that you think is really special and unique about our culture and that you feel like we need to keep? And usually, when you have those kinds of conversations, you start to learn some of the things that aren't just like everybody else. The way we do things, or the audience that we work with, or the group, the way we go about this is really special, and we shouldn't lose that. And so that's one way to get to that. I also think that having conversations that are about understanding the difference between values and culture, I think is an important piece, because think about culture as a much more comprehensive set of attributes that would describe our culture overall, while values are a smaller set of differentiating cultural attributes that we think are going to make the biggest difference in our ability to be successful. So those are the things that we need to call out that are uniquely us. And if you keep testing what you're coming up with around, does it differentiate us? Is it unique to us? Is it going to help us be successful? So keep asking those more strategic kinds of questions as you're thinking about this. Then some of the things might be, you know what? These things are table stakes. I was working with a company that had something, I think it was being proactive. Proactive. I don't know if that's differentiating, right? I think that's a great attribute to have, to be proactive. And sure, we might think that's important, but is that going to make the difference to this company to be successful that people are proactive? Get aim a little higher. I think we can maybe get a little more aspirational here. So I think there are ways to push on that, to test that, to ask people about what's great about the culture now that we don't want to lose, that could help.
So as we do that, one of the challenges sometimes that I hear from people is they are not the CEO or the leadership team of the organization. They are part of the organization, might even be a higher level manager or director. Do they have opportunities for influencing and establishing a culture? Or is this something that again has to be done organizationally with the leadership team? And therefore, from there on, the other managers and executives in the organization don't have as much of a chance to contribute to it.
Yeah, it's so hard. I hear that over and over again too, where people in maybe they manage a team or even a department, and they think, "Gosh, there's we can do so much better with our culture, but I just don't see the CEO being interested. What do I do?" It's really tough. And so what I try to say is have a realistic mindset that you're going to push against the wall of the culture if you do that, which is going to be probably okay. There's times and places where that's great, where that actually can help the organization change when departments do that. But it could be frustrating. But that said, there's probably some really good work you can do with your team if there's not interest from above to make that culture, the subculture of your department, as good as it can be, right? And as positive as it can be. And you could still align it with the values that are on your website, right? And because most companies have that, even though it might not be what other people experience. So I'm saying don't give up. Then you could actually use the work that you're doing in your department or on your team as an example or as a case study or as a way to maybe get the ball rolling. It's just that I always want to say, but it can be hard and it can be frustrating when you do it. But I'd say it's a way healthier approach to than just saying, throwing up your hands and saying, not my problem, beyond my pay grade. I hate that term, beyond my pay grade. I'm not going to take that on. Do the best that you can for the people who work for you, you know?
And it makes a huge difference. I've worked with large organizations where there is drastically, in my view, different culture from one team to another team, in part because of the managing director of that
Yeah.
division or whoever else is responsible for it. So while there are those broader organizational culture elements, every team has its own culture. So you
Yeah.
do have an opportunity as a manager to help guide that.
Absolutely. That's the point I'm always trying to make to CEOs is do you want that? Do you want a very different experience from group to group? And how much is the day to day in these two groups that seem to have very different cultures? How much does that hold you back from being able to achieve these? Every CEO I talk to is concerned about achieving their goals and about making their goals every quarter. And so, how much is that difference pulling away from your ability to be successful? Wouldn't you want everybody kind of rowing in the same direction, having an understanding of what we're trying to achieve and all working in the way that you've defined you think is going to help you be successful? And yeah, and it definitely to me is a missed opportunity from a like C-suite level when I hear that. But that said, I think that leaders at all levels have the opportunity to create an environment where people can be miserable or people can thrive.
And the way you describe it to CEOs, Laura, I couldn't agree with you more. I see the memes a lot of times, and Drucker is actually misquoted in saying culture eats strategy for breakfast. I love the way you put it, which is more aligned with also the way CEOs should think about it, in that culture can support their unique strategic goals. A lot of times, culture is seen as soft, and the way to try to overcome it, people say culture eats strategy for breakfast. Not exactly. They are two different things, they're complementary. The way you put it makes a lot of sense and adds a lot of value in that your culture, your unique culture elements
Yeah.
can be drivers to achieving your strategic goals.
Completely. And how aware are we as leaders of what's really being reinforced and propagated in your culture? I have an example, one that always think of is a company I was working at where we were definitely in competition with each other. And so much so that it would be weird for me to ask my coworker to help me with something. I actually asked her to help me with something when I first started. And it was like she thought I was crazy. And so the thing that was wild about that is we were so competitive with each other, doors closed, not helping each other. But we were working on creating collaboration software at the time, right? And this is what I see over and over again is this just, it's not subtle. It's like blatant disconnects between what's actually happening and what you're trying to achieve. And so I see that over and over again in my work is wait, can't you see this? And this is the thing, I think one of the other reasons why culture is so hard is actually people can't see it. You become such a part of it that you no longer can see it anymore. I think that's another reason why the culture work can be so hard is that we just start to accept it in such a deep level and we don't see anything wrong with it or or that it's holding us back in any way. So we're like, isn't that the way everybody does it? And I think it's when new people come into an organization, they can really see that, oh, no, actually what you're doing is very different from the place I just came from. I think what's amazing about human beings is we adapt, we figure things out, we learn, and we learn to become a part of a new culture. And then we start to accept it. So it's hard to change culture when you're part of it for sure.
Now, you were also a founder. As
Yeah.
a founder, how did you approach establishing the kind of culture you wanted in your startup organization?
Yes. So this was after I had left Microsoft and after I had my consulting business. One of my first customers in my consulting business was a guy who was starting a company, and he asked me to help him get it going. And so I was a co-founder of a software company called Lami. And so I was the chief science officer there and the chief people officer there. And I started to have it was such a good experience for me because I used to be a little finger waggy, especially at CHROs and chief people officers of like, come on, be more strategic. And oh my gosh, like just to have the waves of things coming at you, it was so hard. And so I have a lot more empathy now for people, especially in the head of HR jobs. But it was an amazing experience. On so many levels, it was awful also. It was super hard, and there was times I was so pissed off, But there was in retrospect, yeah, especially as time separated me a little bit from being there, I was like, wow, what an amazing opportunity. And when it comes to culture, that was one of the things that the CEO and we still get together and have lunch. I just had lunch with them 2 weeks ago. And that's one of the things that we were the most proud of is the culture that we created there because we were trying to be very intentional from the very beginning about the culture. And so we did a lot of the things that are in my book. Those are the steps we took, the things that we did. And the culture there became just part of our language. It was very natural. It was, everybody understood it. It was just the way we did things. And I feel like I learned so much about culture from that experience of like really working on it from the very beginning. And when I left, we had 375 employees. So to go from an idea to like that many employees, it was really cool. And it helped us in tons of ways in terms of attracting talent. We never had to work hard at finding people who wanted to work with us. And our attrition levels were really low too. And so we had a lot of things that were really going for us in that. But I also think there are a lot of hard things about culture too. I felt so responsible for it that it affected me very deeply, right? And I think that there's a lot that's can be hard when you say culture really matters. When you very much value the human beings that are there and work to create a place where they feel valued. There can be some really hard things that go down, right? And some really hard decisions that have to be made. And so it's it's not always easy, but boy, I loved what we did and just grateful for that experience. I learned so much.
It's a drastically different experience, but as you said, culture is hard, whatever size organization you are in. One of the challenges, Laura, that I am seeing and hearing quite a bit about is how culture is used as a lightning rod, and it's a push and pull around return to office.
Mhm.
Would love to get your thoughts with respect to how that impacts organizations, flexible
Yeah.
and hybrid work, and
Yeah.
how leaders should think about return to office as a contributor to their organizational culture.
I think that in a lot of ways, when you're in person, there are so many other cues, there's so many other things that are in the space that you're in as a human being. There's a lot of props, right? I call them culture props. When you're in the office, you got all these props. You got all these people, you got this energy, you got the cool new sofa, you got there's the coffee. These props help us with our culture. But when we're in these little squares in Zoom or Teams, we just don't have those culture props. All we have are the facial expressions and the words and the chat messages that are coming in during the Zoom meeting that are giving us information about the culture. And so that is why managers and leaders are just so important in what they say and do and how they support or don't support people. It's just sending way more of a message than it did before when you had all these other culture props in person. And so I get the idea. I love being in person with people. I think there's a lot of value to that. I think it's wonderful that we're able to do that more now. But I also think the flexibility and the autonomy of working from home has huge advantages for lots of people, especially women or people who are taking care of parents or kids. Or it's hard to work full time and have other responsibilities. So I think that I have more of an issue with the mandate and also get that we want to do more face to face. So optimal to me would be hybrid and intentional hybrid, right? Where we understand the work that we could do from home that might go better when we're at home and the work that we could do in person. That what is the difference between those kinds of work, right? And we don't want to just go into the office and be on a Zoom call with all the people who are at home. So there's a lot, I think, for us to figure out.
I couldn't agree with you more, Laura, in that I love how you mentioned, first of all, there are benefits around flexibility and autonomy that people seek. On the other hand, there are real valuable benefits to us interacting in
Yeah.
person with people, the connection, the sharing the relationships are very different. So it's
Yeah.
approaching it from that perspective rather than the binary sense of, oh, it's better for culture, so we are
And
doing that. Flexibility and autonomy are also part of culture. So you
yes,
can't just say culture is just people's presence together. So it requires a more nuanced approach rather
completely.
than the mandate one way or another because this is what we think makes sense.
Completely. It's the idea of a polarity. I just feel like there's so much to be said for two things that seem to be opposite from each other and wanting to do both of those things, right? It's not one or the other, it's both. And so I love the way you said that.
Now, Laura, you also talk about the oversimplification of culture as a check the box initiative. That is a big challenge in a lot of teams and organizations. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes teams or organizations make when they are trying to tackle culture?
So one of the things, and we touched on this a little bit, but just having it be an HR thing. And not because HR, I feel like HR people are especially skilled at being able to do work with culture. So it's not that. It's more what we were talking about before around power and really making sure that the leaders are driving the culture work. So I see a lot of organizations just saying, hey, head of HR, go fix our culture, go work on our culture, or tell me what we need to do after culture, which it can be a little frustrating because it obviously needs to, I think, be more driven from the very top. So I think that's one of the mistakes I see from a culture perspective. Definitely the idea of the mandate, as it was we were just talking about, but just saying, okay, here's our culture. Now go live it and not thinking about it as an ongoing process where you actually have to inspire people. And I think this is one of the things for some leaders. Some leaders are really good at understanding their role as being being somebody who inspires. But a lot of CEOs don't get that and don't understand that is something that's an amazing, beautiful opportunity in front of you is that people are looking to you to be inspired by you. And I see a lot of leaders who don't either know how to do that or don't take advantage of that and say, gosh, there's a lot that's really cool about what we're doing with our business. Let me explain that to you. Let me get you excited about your role in that and having just culture be, okay, this is what it is. And I'm going to send it out in an email. I was working somewhere where the culture got rolled out over email. And so just generally, that's a bad idea is just to send out your new values in an email. Let's just say that. In the fact that place that happened, you could hear people laughing when they were reading it because it was so unclear that it was aspirational. So people would read it and say, that has nothing to do with our culture. If it had been in person, the person could have described that this is what we're striving for and this matters to our strategy in this way. But instead, they sent it out in an email and it landed really poorly. So that's another example of something. Do not do that. Many things that I see that are, I don't want to say laughable, but yeah, I guess I'll say laughable.
And they actually make it harder to get the culture right. There's a certain level of immunization that I think happens in organizations where the second you start talking about culture with team members in the organization, they're like, oh no, we've been there before.
Oh,
We came up with this document and nothing
completely.
happened.
Nothing. Good point. The nothing happened piece is definitely something that I've seen. There's starts and stops, and nothing really comes from it. And that again, usually if you look at that a little bit deeper, you find that it was probably some really somebody with good intentions, but somebody who didn't have any power who was trying to work on the culture piece. So yeah, a lot of that, a lot of superficial culture work, like culture committees that are like, let's have a party and let's have margaritas. And I'm not anti margarita at all. I'm pro margarita. But it's come on, like that is not going to change culture. It's the whole lipstick on a pig. You can put a great margarita in the pig's hand and it's still a pig. And when people go back to their cube or their office or their Zoom meeting and things are the same, it's not going to make a difference. So yeah, those are really good.
So, Laura, for folks listening who want to start improving their organizational culture, whether CEO or at other levels of the organization, but are feeling overwhelmed. Vast majority of executives I talk to at any level of the organization, there is a tremendous sense of overwhelm.
Yeah.
Where would you recommend they focus their efforts first? What are some things they can do to make a difference on their team or organization's culture?
Sure, there's some real simple things you can do. If you already have values in place, there's a really simple exercise that leaders can do with their teams. And it starts by just saying, hey, first kind of setting the stage and saying that this is going to be safe. There's nothing that's going to happen that's bad to you for you speaking up here. So that's important. But talking with people and saying, okay, when you think about our culture, what are the first 5 words that come to your mind? And they can be good, they can be bad, they can be neutral, but just tell me the 5 words, write them down. Okay, great. Everybody do that. All right. So now what I'd like you to think about is, what are our values? And that's a really interesting thing. Again, it needs to be a safe place. But I find huge differences in the way people respond to that question. First, there's the freak out, deer in headlights. Oh my God, I have no idea what our values are. Where's my key card that has it on there? Looking it up on their phone, right? So there's that response. Then there are the other people who are like, oh yeah, like I completely know our values. So that's a little kind of test right there, is do people even know your values? And I was shockingly about 6 months ago with a CEO who could not name the company's values. And so it's not just employees who don't know the values, but then compare the values to the list of 5 words that you came up with. Because what I find, like this really unscientific way of doing a little culture assessment, right? Of saying, oh my gosh, our company values in those 5 words I wrote, look at the overlap, right? Oh, there's some, even use some of the same words, or the things are maybe not the exact same word, the same idea. But then there are the people who are like, oh my gosh, those are 2 completely different lists that have nothing to do with each other. Or even more brutally, look at how they're the opposite of each other, right? On our values, we say collaborative, and on my list, I put competitive. And so that to me is a really easy way to get just a temperature check around, how big of a problem do we have? And another thing that leaders could do is just to get feedback from employees around, of our values, which ones do we really live all the time? Which ones are the ones that we live, and which ones do we need to do some work on? And then you can narrow the list down and say, oh gosh, there's some of these that we're really doing well at, but there's a couple we need to just double down and do some more work and think about some things that we could do in the day to day that might help us get better at these. So that there's definitely things you can do. It doesn't have to be this really huge, hard thing. There are things you can do to start the ball rolling.
I love those recommendations, Laura, because with one or two well thought out meetings and conversations in a psychologically safe environment, you can actually have a good estimation of where the alignment is, where there is a disconnect, and what you can do. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a transformative cultural project that is announced and rolled out.
Exactly. And I think that if you just take those kinds of baby steps, right? If the CEO said, oh my gosh, I want to really work on this particular value, let's start doing that. Let's start uncovering what's going on here. And you're going to see the progress.
Outstanding. So, how can the audience find out more about you, Laura, follow your work, and find out about your book as well?
Yeah. So I have a website that's Paris, Paris, Phoenix, Phoenix, group.com. And so Paris is city, Phoenix is city. Those are my kids' middle names. People always ask about, why Paris and Phoenix? They don't seem like the same kind of city. So ParisPhoenixGroup.com is my website. And then, of course, LinkedIn. I always love to connect with people. So I'm on LinkedIn under Laura Hamill, Hamill. And I'd love to connect with people. And please, my book, The Power of Culture, you can buy it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the kind of typical places you would buy a book.
Really appreciate the conversation, Laura. Most specifically, ideas that, regardless of whether the person is the CEO of the organization, serves on a leadership team, or a manager of a group or division, that they can implement this coming week to make a difference for the culture of their team and organization? Thank you so much for the conversation, Laura Hamill.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. That was so much fun talking with you.